during the week I was thinking about some things. What we're going to do right now is the open mic. And so if you've got some stories, we want to keep it around five minutes or so. You know, we don't want any hunting stories unless Bigfoot took the deer that you shot. So, you know, go along those lines. And so, but then I thought what I would do is tell you about really how the powwow got started. How many came off of Terry's video? Anybody? And new guys? How many new guys are there? Okay, well, Kent got it pretty close, but he missed it a little bit. This is actually our 19th year. Kent said it was the 18th, but it's the 19th. We did miss 2 years. Like Kent said, we got rained out terrible, bad one year, and Kent and I were both real sick one year, so we missed 2 years. And we started in my family room, and there wasn't 6, there was 4. So Kent got pretty close, but not right on. So probably the end of the 80s, a couple friends and I, we got into George Thompson's books. Anybody know who I'm talking about? I mean, who's George? Okay. They're getting kind of hard to find, especially the good one, which was Some Dreams Die. That was, I think, was the best one he had. And we got into these books, and I'm telling you, we just got addicted to them. And there was 3 of us, and the one guy has a business in Kaysville down across the mountain here, and he says, Mark, I found this guy. And I said, cool. And this guy was, what a stud this guy was. His name was Wayne. And we met him one day. He hooked us up, and we went upstairs at his business. And Wayne had under his arms, he had a bunch of maps with him. And we go in, and he says, shut the door. So there's just 4 of us. And he looks at us, he says, well, how dangerous you want to make this? And so we looked at each other like, really? Are you kidding me? So he pulls these maps out, and he had a map, big map, and it wasn't like an old-fashioned map. It was his. And there were X's and circles and stars all over through this map. And, you know, the funny thing, we got to know Wayne really, really well. And we was going over to his house a lot. But so the thing with Wayne was, Wayne wouldn't tell you anything, but if you ask him, he'd tell you everything. So he wouldn't volunteer it, but if you're smart enough to ask him, he would really unload on you. He would give you everything, and he was great. So, you know, I was looking at the map, and I said, Wayne, what's this? And he goes, well, that's the Spanish Moon. I said, really? Yeah, there was nothing in it, so we just let it go. And then there was another one, there was a star, and I said, well, Wayne, what's this? And he says, it was a Spanish cannon. And I said, please tell me, let's go get it. And he said, nah, it's in the dirt, and we are after the gold, so I'm just not, you know, it's not worth messing with. So, you know, we got to know Wayne pretty good, and we would go over to his house over in Clinton, and I'm going to tell you a little story about Wayne. His wife would just go, oh, crud, because she pretty much put an end to his treasure hunting. And Wayne was a contractor, and he was with some kind of crazy guys in Vernal. I think he was actually related to him, but shoestring relation. And so they would go out, and they seriously looked. I mean, they were good. They knew what they were doing, and they went a lot. So, and they had horses, so they could really cover some ground. So he told his wife, he says, you know, honey, I'm going for the weekend, and I'll see you, you know, Sunday night, Monday morning. Okay, good, be safe, be careful, get all this. Wayne didn't come back for 10 weeks. And I guess when he got home, his wife came right out of her shoes. And Wayne never told me, but I'm sure, I am positive that that's what put an end to Wayne's treasure hunting years. And so when we came a few years later, Wayne would get all excited. He said, oh, man, I got my blood pumping again. I want to go out. And his wife would just go, oh, geez, no. So anyway, Wayne, we would go see Wayne for 3 or 4 years, 5 years, off and on. And we're going, and, you know, we never did. Well, Wayne ended up getting Alzheimer's. And, you know, here his wife hated our guts, but we'd invite him to the powwow. And the powwow started out pretty dang simple. I mean, he was in my shop. We had 3, 4, 10 guys, mostly my subs, and they would come, and so I'd invite Wayne, and he said, oh, yeah, I'm coming. But if you've dealt with any of the Alzheimer's people, new things really mess with them. So he would call me a couple times in a row. He'd call me years in a row, and he'd say, I can't come. I'd go, oh, Wayne, come on. No, I just can't come. I appreciate you asking. So then his wife would call me and say, Mark, please keep asking him. His Wayne needs to get out because he's just stuffed in this stupid house. But we went to dinner with him one night and went over some stuff, and he was pretty sharp. But there'd be, he would lose. You could see him fade away a little bit. So that's kind of how we started this whole. Well, and then so I met Kent. I was building the house. I'm a contractor. I was building the house just half a mile below the gate, and Kent would come up to inspect my house. And I don't know how many contractors there are here, but if you can get an inspector out in 15 minutes, your life is good. And Kent would stay for 4 hours because we'd just sit in BS. So he'd do the quick inspection, and then we'd talk, and I said, well, Kent, I met this Wayne Checketts, and I want to meet him, So I hooked up the first powwow in my family room, and I remember look what this has happened here. I remember driving home after the powwow, a couple days later, and I called a friend of mine and said, that was really fun. We got to keep doing it. But right now, we're going to just open it up, keep it 5 minutes-ish on stories that kind of relate to what's going on in the powwow.
In our offices, I worked for Morgan County, and had been in the offices, and it looked like he was death warmed over. He looked like he was dead. And I'd said hi to him, and so I talked to the other friend. He says, did you hear what happened to him? And I says, what do you mean, that he was really sick? And he says, well, that's part of it. And I says, what else? And he says, well, did you hear he died? And I says, he died? I says, I didn't hear anything about it. I says, when's his funeral going to be? And he says, well, they're not going to bury him. And I says, what do you mean they're not going to bury him? And he says, well, so what happened was he was basically on his deathbed. He has 10 children, and he'd told his wife to call all the children, have them come in and say their last goodbyes to him. So they all came over to the house, and they all said their last goodbyes, and they'd all left the house, except the oldest son was sitting in the bedroom with him. And so he was sitting there for a while, and then his dad just very peacefully passed away while he was sitting in the bedroom with him. So he got up and went out and told the wife. He says, well, your dad's died. So they called, first person they called in was one of the sheriff deputies. And he came over, checked everything out, says, yeah, he's died. And they chatted for a while. And then they called the ambulance. And the ambulance came over, and they checked for a pulse. They checked his body temperature, and it was below a live person. He definitely was dead. He wasn't breathing. He had no pulse. His body temperature was too low. And so they chatted with the family for a little bit, and they says, well, we can't write a death certificate. And they said, so we're going to load him in the ambulance up here in Morgan, and we're going to take him down to Davis to the hospital down there, and we'll have some doctors down there fill out the death certificate. So they put him in the ambulance, and they took him down to Davis Hospital. And it just so happened that one of this person's son-in-laws works in Davis Hospital. So he come up with the doctors, and they're all chatting, and they bring the body in and start doing whatever it is they do, and getting ready to sign off on this. And the son-in-law says, I just keep getting a feeling that he's not dead. And so they bring in a team of doctors and start working on him and bring him back to life. He's been dead for an hour and a half. An hour and a half he's been dead. And they bring him back to life, and so he's back up farming and doing all his stuff and that. I talked to 2 or 3 people, and I says, I got to go over and get this story. This is better than anything I've seen on TV or in the books. To be dead for an hour and a half and come back to life. And, of course, I'm really curious if he remembers anything from the time he died for an hour and a half till they brought him back to life. And so since then, I've run into him a few times, and each time I get a little bit more out of him. He doesn't want to talk about it very much. But I asked him, one of the first things I asked him the first time I saw him after that was, I says, Do you remember anything that happened between the time you died in your bedroom and until the doctors brought you back to life down the hospital an hour and a half later? He says, yeah, I remember all of it. And I said, so what happened? He says, I don't want to talk about it. I keep getting little bits and pieces. He gives me a little bit more of stories each time and that. But I've got to get with him, make sure when he tells me he doesn't want to talk about it, that he's getting it written down for his family and hopefully other people for when he passes away. The interesting thing is, he says, I know exactly how I'm going to die. He says, I came back because there were some things that I needed to finish before I could die, and I know how and when I'm going to die, which I thought, I don't know if that'd be real scary or whatever to know how and when you were going to die. And he says, I'm no longer afraid of dying at all. He says, it's the most peaceful feeling that I've ever had in that. But I thought that was, to me, that's a real interesting story. So those are the kind of the stories we're wanting to hear from you. I got one more quick one for you, and then I know Mark's got one, and some of the others of you probably have some that you'd like to tell, so we want to give you your 10, 15 minutes of fame. But a couple of months ago, I had a friend of mine call me in my office, and he said, I hadn't seen him for a while, but he called me up, and he says, Ken, he says, I've got a favor that I want you to do for me. And I says, what do you got? What do you want me to do? And he says, I had my CPA for my business call me up yesterday, and he told me that I needed to come down to his office, that he needed to see me. And so he says, I went down. This CPA was also the CPA for his father and for his grandfather and for an uncle. Quite a few family members had this same guy. Apparently he's quite elderly, and he goes down to his office and he says, you know, I feel kind of embarrassed and that about this, but he says, your grandfather many years ago gave me a leather briefcase for you, and he wanted me to hold it safekeeping for a while, and then I was supposed to give it to you probably 20, 30 years ago kind of thing. And he says, it got lost in a drawer with junk and that. And he says, I'm getting ready to retire, and I'm starting to shut down my business. I'm cleaning things up, and I ran across this leather briefcase. And so that's why I called you to come down here and get it from me. And so he says, here it is. This is yours. Take it. And so he takes it home, and he opens it up. And inside is it's full of old coins, and it's got a whole bunch of trying to think what they call them. Anyway, so some of them are deeds to property, but and other things similar to that. He's got certificates of ownership or whatever in oil companies, and hundreds and hundreds of mines, just all kinds of old documents. Now, these documents are dating in the late 1800s into about 1903 is about the earliest document I can find. But so he brings them up and gives them to me. He hasn't even done an inventory. He doesn't know how many coins or what they are. He doesn't know what the documents are. He just brings me this whole thing to my work the next day and says, here, look at these for a couple of months and tell me what you think about them. And I'm going, man, I can't believe you just give me all this stuff, and you haven't even taken an inventory of that. I could go down and cash in half the coins or something, and he probably wouldn't even know. But a lot of old, large 1-cent pieces that are about the size of a 50-cent piece, and just all kinds of old coins in there, and then all these documents. And the documents are so cool. The people who made up all these mining share documents and that have, they're people like that make the stamps to stamp the dollars and different things, and they've got mining scenes on all these things that are just fabulous. But again, just kind of a fun treasure that happens. You know, you hear about them in auctions or somebody getting up in an attic and finding this kind of stuff and that, but I got a whole bunch of them. I've got them down in my Jeep, so maybe after a few stories I'll show you a little bit of, because I got the whole thing down there, but I'll show you a little bit of what it was. But
so kind of reluctant, but it's back in 1982. I just kind of got give a little preface to this. Back in 1982, our former scoutmaster, when I was 17 years old, the boundaries had split to where he was now a scoutmaster for 12 and 13-year-olds. And so he wanted to, he was going to take his new troop back to place in Wyoming. You have to drive 20 miles on a dirt road, and then you have to hike 6 miles back into this lake. A very beautiful lake. He took us one time on a survival there, and we lived off literally the fish that we caught because all the other things that were there did not exist. And I had a 32-inch waist at the time, and I lost like 3 or 4 belt loops. But anyway, so he knew the area really well, and he wanted his new scout troop to have an adventure. So he asked if we would go up there prior to him taking his troop up there and make big footprints. And we told him we'd make red cellophane lights like eyes and stuff like that. And this was before the people knew about red eye shine and things like that. In fact, it wasn't until a couple years ago I remembered that, hey, I'm jumping ahead. But so we made these red cellophane lights and everything. So we went up there prior to, and we said, okay, camp at the north end of the lake, and we're going to make one pristine campfire. You camp there. And so we ended up burying firecrackers in the camp in the pit, which was funny when they went off because they were blaming each other. But so that night came, and we were going to leave footprints and making some bear noises and stuff. But at one point in time, I wouldn't do this. I look back, I go, we shouldn't have done that. But anyway, we did. But so it started kind of getting carried away. The kids were getting nervous, and so he started wanting us to stop. And so all of a sudden, he starts talking to someone over, and this is in the pine. We're deep in the pine trees, and he starts talking to some red eyes to our right. He starts saying, "Okay, red eyes, you guys need to calm down, stop." And I'm going, "Wait a minute, we're not over there." And who's he talking to? But later on, he said that the red eyes were about 7+ feet up. And so he's over there talking to the red eyes, and I'm going, what? We couldn't figure out what was going on. So he ends up telling the troop that it's us, and the troop all knows us, and so they start yelling my name and my friend's name, and so we end up revealing ourselves, camping with them. And then the following day, my friend goes out with half the troop and goes off the beaten path. And my friend likes to tell the yarn now and again. He comes back to me and he goes, "Guess what prints I found?" And I knew, okay, yeah, he's trying to pull one on me. And I said, "Elk." He says, "Yeah." I said, "Deer." He goes, "Yes." And I go, "Bear." And he goes, "Yes." And I wasn't going where he wanted to go. And I said, "What?" And so reluctantly I said, "Bigfoot." And he goes, "Yes." I said, "You're so full of crap." And so he goes, "No, seriously." And so my scoutmaster and that half of the troop took us back. It was off the beaten path. Mind you, this is 20 miles on a dirt road, 6 miles back to this lake, and then off in the middle of nowhere, off the beaten path, even where the horseback. But there had been a mudslide that had occurred. It was a gray mud. My mom was an art teacher, so I grew up in the art world, and I was used to the detail and potter's clay and things like that. But there had been it was about 200 yards wide, maybe 400 yards long, and there was tracks all over through this mudslide. And he goes, "The prints are up here." I'm thinking the whole time that they're trying to pull a fast one on us because of the prints that we made. I was thinking that he was left the prints or something. So anyway, we get up there, and sure enough, there's 3 sets of prints, and it didn't register with me. It didn't register what I was looking at. So we start investigating the prints, and I was very athletic at the time, and there was a large set that was probably about 16, 17 inches long, and then a smaller set with another set that was about my foot, and I had a 10.5 foot print at the time. The medium and the small stuck together and meandered through this clay, and the big one would kind of go over and come back and stuff. And so I was really curious, and so I started looking at the print. I could see the dermal ridges in the prints, and we estimated there was probably over 100 prints in this clay, and the clay covered the ground, everything except for the trees, the shrubs, the big things. But there was one point I was following the large set of prints, and I came to this log that was about yay high, and it had cleared the log with one step. And I had to, because I was, like I said, I was very athletic at the time. I was a sprinter. I played football. I did all that stuff, and I tried to imitate that step, and I could not do it. I had to step on top of the log and hop over. But the interesting thing was, is all of a sudden, about halfway looking through these prints, it dawns on you that something made these prints. And up until about 9 years ago, I was terrified of the subject. The subject scared the living daylights out of me, because I knew personally now that something existed. But I've never, it's one of those events in your life that at the time you didn't talk about it because it was really taboo, and so we never said anything. Our whole troop, my scoutmaster, we never said anything about this. And I kicked myself because it was a gold mine of prints, because it was perfect. They were hard. Every print was unique and stuff. But so it was several years later. I was first married in the early '90s, and we used to do family campouts in the Uintas, and I'm still terrified of the subject. The woods at night scared me, even though I was a big game hunter. I hated the woods at night, even if I had a rifle. And so I'm out just doing a nice evening walk, and all of a sudden I find a track. And I go, oh, you got to be kidding me. They're in Uintas too. But so since then I've gotten involved in it. But when I was 18, it was one of those things that's once in a lifetime, and the prints were phenomenal. And I wish I would. I know I'll probably never find anything like that in my life, but there was distinctly. It was a family unit from what we can gather and talking about it and stuff. And there was just a small pair, a medium pair, and then a large pair. But very unique, and that's essentially my story.
The trip in May of 2015, I had the privilege of going on another trip for another hideout. And this hideout was Matt Warner, who was with Butch Cassidy for 20 years, served 3.5 years in the old Sugar House prison, and then later became Deputy Sheriff and Justice of the Peace of Carbon County, Utah. In 1934, Matt Warner revisited his old haunts, and we have not been able to figure out where that hideout was. Well, I got a phone call from this guy, and he says, I've been trying to find you for 2 years. I says, 2 years? Anyway, I met him, and we scheduled a time to go down. And so we headed out, and we got down to this turnoff about 10 o'clock at night. We get down there, and I thought he was a nice Mormon boy. And I smoked cigars, and so I didn't bring any cigars so I wouldn't be tempted to smoke in front of him. So we get down there to this turnoff. He says, Steve, get out. And I like I said, I've only met him twice, and I didn't really know what was coming off. And he says, Steve, I want to show you something. And he says, right over here, this canyon goes down 800 feet. And I thought, oh, he's going to push me over the cliff. Okay. And the road had been not maintained. The BLM had kind of sloughed it off a little bit. He had tires on his truck about that high. And so we get back in his four-wheel truck, and he sits there for a minute. Next thing you know, he's lighting up a bowl of marijuana. And here, what do I do? You know, I'm a passenger. I don't know what to do. And so he smokes a bowl, and I'm next to the cliff. And there's like 1 or 2 inches along the side. And he's got about 6 inches on the other side. So we drive down there, and I'm scared to death. I'm scared. He's smoked this bowl of marijuana, and he's pretty high. And we get past there, and finally I'm pretty good there. And he says, you know, this is the best one. Tomorrow's the one that you have to worry about. So we get over to the other, make a camp, and sure enough, the next morning, the other one was bad. So we get over there and get on there, and I was scared to death. But anyway, get over there, and we found 3 sites where Matt had been, and it was in my book, in Matt's original book, and we took pictures of it. There was a corral, great big huge corral that they had taken cedar trees that were great big huge. I don't know where they got them. They made a great big huge corral. And right on top of the ground was artifacts right and left. And these were from the 1890s. There was cans, there was medicine bottles, there was all kinds of stuff just laying on the ground, and they were in mint condition. And he had picked up stuff before, and he went up on top to this big rock to see if there was water up on top. And so I said, I'm a little dizzy, I don't want to climb up the rock, and so I walked around that corral, and all of a sudden here I was picking up all these little artifacts that was around the corral. And anyway, I picked up a whole bunch of stuff, and then there was a water seep. I don't know how they got up things up there, because there was not a road built until 1950 during the uranium boom. And so they had got a covered wagon in there at some point, and had taken the box off of the wagon and put it under the water seep, and that's where they made a trough so that they had fresh water under this seep, and that box was still there, and it was so awesome. And they had made a ditch so that they could water horses and stuff down at the bottom. It was totally awesome. There was no other animals or anything there, and it was where they had brought the girls so they could romance them behind the big rocks, and it was so cool. And as we were leaving, I was on the other side this time when it was 800 feet straight down, and believe me, every time that we got ready to go, you had to light up another bowl of marijuana and go. I was scared to death. I couldn't tell you exactly how to get into it. You couldn't drive a regular vehicle into it, but it was totally awesome. And I was telling a few people tonight, just before, when they were eating, someone commented because I had dessert on my plate along with my food. Matt Warner always said, eat your dessert first before your food, because you never know that the law may come after you, because you may not get your dessert. And the dessert's the most important. So.
Hi, they call me Alien Dave. My name is Dave Rosenfeld. I've been hunting UFOs here in Utah for over 20 years, and seen some quite interesting things. I just wanted to share a couple things with you. How many people here know about Skinwalker Ranch? Oh, quite a few. As most of you know, Skinwalker Ranch was owned by Robert Bigelow, and he has, in the last couple of years, have sold the property to a new individual. I can't mention his name. I signed an NDA. But he invited me on the property last year for kind of a VIP tour, and it was always one of my kind of bucket list items to go on Skinwalker Ranch. And so here I am out on Skinwalker Ranch, and with no security, no guide, no nothing. Just said, go do what you want, more or less. And so we went and checked out all the homesteads, and we went to the normal places where you heard about the incidents in the book, with the holes in the ground and the cattle mutilations and the portals and all that type of thing. And so anyways, I'm kind of scared because I'm out there by myself, and the nearest person's probably, 500 yards, 600 yards away, and they're paying no attention to me whatsoever. But I do have the dogs with me, and that was really strange, because wherever you go on this ranch, these dogs are following you. They're almost like protectors or guarding you from something. But so that made me feel a little bit of ease. But I'm out in the middle of the field out there by one of the bait pens that you've all heard of, at least the people who've followed Skinwalker Ranch. These bait pens were used by the NIDS team to hopefully catch a cattle mutilation on tape, and then they used them also for observation towers. They used to keep dogs in the fence part, and to protect themselves, and also as an alert. But here I am out by one of the bait pens, and I'm walking around in the middle of the night. It's probably midnight or so, and I found it quite funny that I was in that situation to even begin with. And I look up on Skinwalker Ridge, and there's a light coming down off the ridge, and I'm doing the the selfie video thing, and I'm kind of talking to myself because I won't be able to post that video anywhere because I signed that NDA. But it was one of those moments where you realize how stupid you really are by doing some of this stuff out in the middle of this ranch that's known for mutilations and UFO sightings and Bigfoot and all these things, and I'm more or less talking to myself saying, well, I just seen this light over on the ridge line, and it seems I'm going to walk toward it in the middle of the night. And anyways, nothing really happened that night, which was unusual because most of the times I go out there, you feel this heaviness, this feeling like you shouldn't be there, that you don't belong. And this particular weekend when I went there, I didn't feel any of that. And it might be because of the new ownership and their outlook on what they want to do out there research-wise. It's more subtle, and they're not trying to force the phenomena to do things. They're more or less inviting it and trying to communicate with it now, which I think is a better way of doing that. But if any of you guys are interested in the Skinwalker Ranch, you can hit up my website, or I think it's in August. A new documentary film's coming out. It's called Hunt for the Skinwalker. It's named right after the book. Jeremy Corbell showed his presentation last weekend at the UFO Fest in Cedar City, and it looks really, really good. What it mostly involves is George Knapp, who was in the Skinwalker story since the Bigelow buyout in '96. Has been recording all this stuff out there, all the investigations, all the mutilations that they run across, the 95-pound calf that was in broad daylight, void of meat and blood. They have that on video. I mean, all this stuff they couldn't release before because people had signed a non-disclosure agreement. George Knapp's NDA had expired 2 years ago, so he's gung-ho to release some of this stuff. He did get permission from Robert Bigelow to release it and to make the movie. I think Bigelow is not liking it, though, but he doesn't have any say in the matter now. So if you guys want to see a really good film coming up in August, look for that film called Hunt for the Skinwalker.
Thanks, Dave. I'll tell a story of a guy interviewed a few years ago. We were clearing out, there was a database that people would submit reports to, and we had, my friend of mine, we had just become investigators, and we cleared out the Utah flat, and it was the Montana flat that didn't have any investigators, so we were going through that, and I came across a record that had been submitted 4 years prior, and it was so intriguing to me that I wanted to track this guy down, so I gave the phone call, and he had moved from Montana, and long story short, it was a weird chain of events, but I found him, and he was in Beaver, Utah. And this guy was a guide, and he was it was an elk hunt up in Montana, and he was going out the day before, checking out the area to see if where the elk were and things like that. And the interesting thing was when you interview people over the phone to cross-examine them, it was easy to see. It was pretty quick to see if they were legit or not. But this record was 4 years old, and this is what made this very unique. Because I had his written words in front of me, and to remember a submitted story that long ago, if you were BSing, would be very difficult. Because you could interview someone 2 weeks later, and it was easy to find out if they were legit. Because usually a sighting, in this particular case, in his case, was very life-changing. Anyway, long story short, he's coming back to camp. He had been out all day. He was on his horse, and the wind was in his face, and he was in some pine trees. He said this particular horse that he was on was very sensitive to, it acted very funny if there was either moose or bear in the area. And he said his horse started behaving like there was a moose or a bear in the area. And he said the one thing you do when you're on a horse, I'm not a horse person, so I'm taking his word for it. He says you pay attention to the horse, because the horse is going to know where the presence is or the subject is long before you're ever going to see it. And all of a sudden the horse's head snapped left, and mind you, the wind's in his face,
And he looks over to the left, and behind a root ball about 25 feet away, he sees a subject, which he described as Bigfoot, crouched down behind this root ball. He says he was so close he could see the eyes dilate. He said what was interesting to him, because he was a long-time hunter, he said that the subject was in a position of ready to pounce, like to go after him. And he said that as soon as he saw it, he could tell the subject kind of leaned back, like it misidentified what was coming over the rise or what he was. He was so caught up in the situation and also terrified that he told me later he would have actually probably pulled out his rifle and probably tried to shoot it. But he says he knew, based off the situation, that there's no way that would have happened. So he just kind of acted like nothing was happening and let his horse go on its way. But he said later on, he started thinking about the situation, and he thinks that this subject had misidentified him, being a four-legged animal, thinking it was a prey and was ready to pounce and take that prey out. But then when he saw that there was a human on this horseback, that's when he kind of changed the Squatch changed his mind and didn't hit him. But the interesting thing about this is it was 4 years later, and he knew everything. I could not find one hole in his thing. And it's one of the few. It's not that I said don't disbelieve people when I interview them. It's just I don't know because I wasn't there. But he was so credible and so interesting to me that 4 years later he did not skip a beat. And but anyway, that's
Great, thank you.
cool story.
Hey guys, my name is Kai. This is my first time being out here. It's really cool to see all the stories and hear all the stories that I have heard so far. But I have an interesting one myself. I don't know if you guys know the camping site Rock Creek. It's kind of down by the Duchesne area, kind of an hour outside Vernal. But it's a camping site that my mom's side of the family has helped run for many generations, and they worked there for a long time. And about 10 years ago, when I was about 12 or 13 years old, I was up there camping with them like we did every summer. And me and my cousin Mike, who was just a few years older than me, about 15 or 16, he wanted to show me all the new things that he had found while working with his family at this campsite. And one of the things I didn't know at that age was, one, that this campsite and this campground was divided with native land. So there was just a fence that divided the campsite and native land that was right next to it. And I had no idea you weren't allowed to go on native land at that time in my life. And we started hiking pretty deep into the forest, just trying to see what we could see. And he wanted to show me. He found a lot of different animals where they were sleeping. There was a bear's nest where they had carried a bunch of tin cans and stuff from camps. And as we kept going, it kept getting thicker and thicker. There were more and more trees. And then we came to a fence that was made out of wood, and across the fence was this prairie that was huge. There wasn't a tree in sight. There wasn't a bush in sight. And I thought that was rather weird because I was looking around and I saw all of the trees, and me and my cousin looked at each other, and in the distance we saw this waterfall that was coming down into this crevice, and we really wanted to see what it was about. He said that he'd been working here and he had never seen this place before, so we hop the fence and we start walking, and it's a pretty good distance from the fence to this little area, this ravine. And we get there and we realize that it's a straight drop down. And when we look down, it's about 60 feet. So there was really no way for us to get down there. But when we look down there, we see a lot of wildlife. We see, rabbits. We see a couple of deer. They're drinking out of the stream that was coming down from the waterfall. It was just a beautiful, beautiful place. So we decided to just sit down and start dangling our feet and started talking about, all sorts of stuff. And about 30 to 45 minutes later, my cousin looked at his watch and said, "Hey, I think dinner's done. I think we should probably find our way back." When we both stand up and we turn around, and I almost spooked myself over the over the edge, there was 2 Native Americans standing right behind us. And they were dressed like you would normally picture a Native American be dressed in leather. They had face paint all over. They had the feathers and the beads in their hair. And the first thing that my 12-year-old self caught was the rifles that were over their shoulder. They were older looking, notched, crafted and customized their own way. And me and my cousin kind of just looked at these 2 figures for a moment. I mean, we didn't hear them come up behind us. We had no idea where they had come from. And one of them looked at us and said, and pointed towards a fence and said, "You have 5 minutes before I pull the trigger." And at that point, being 12 years old and hearing that from somebody, and my cousin was very protective of me, he grabbed my arm and we started running. And at that time, time isn't something that you can comprehend. When someone tells you only have 5 minutes or you're dead, time disappears. So all I remember was running in this prairie for as long, it seemed like hours. We finally got on the other side of the fence, and we quickly turned around, and the 2 figures were gone. And I looked at my cousin and I said, first of all, where could they have come from and where could they have gone? And we started, we didn't want to go on the other side of the fence again after that experience, but we started kind of going around the fence, and it was still a prairie for as long as you could see. And to this day, I have no idea where they came from, where they went. But after that, I've heard a lot of stories up at Rock Creek of the different Native Americans and different people getting chased out, and stories of finding land that no one's ever seen before. And the weirdest thing is I've been to that campsite many times after that, and I can't find that prairie wherever it was. I don't know if it's what was there, what could have been there. I don't know, but it was an exciting yet terrifying experience for myself. So it's kind of my story.
I came up here unintentionally. As far as Squatch mythology goes, my name's Jay Stump. I reside in Roy. Let me take you back to about, and I figured this out last night. I haven't shared the story very much, but the year was 77, and I was 15 years old. Pine Plateau Estates is across from Manorlands, if you know the Bear River service, and coming into Uintas from the from Evanston side. My father purchased some land and little cabin property on Pine Plateau Estates, and we would go up every weekend during the summer. I think it was his attempt to keep me out of football, keep from getting my knees busted up or whatever. I liked playing football a lot back then. So this one evening, it was kind of a day like today. It was about probably an hour earlier in the day. There were some shadows being cast, and I was tasked with cleaning up our work site, in the cabin. And my dad and little sister had gone down to our neighbors just down this dirt road, and we had seen deer around. We'd seen a moose once going down to water down the Bear River. We were probably, as the crow flies, maybe 500 to 600 yards off the river, and there was some animal paths through there. And like the one gentleman shared, how his horse reacted to the odors and stopped and turned to the left. Well, my sighting was to my right, and I was on back then we didn't have mountain bikes. We had the, 10 speeds, and the road was just messed up anyway. But I was going to ride the bike down. And, the first thing from my mind was seeing a deer or elk or a moose or anything like that. We'd just notice that it'd pass by and we'd see them once in a while. So I'm going down the road, and I finished up cleaning up the site, our cabin. And who's ever been startled by a branch or twig snapping so loud that you think, man, that's got to be a big animal? Show of hands. As you're walking along, it kind of catches you off guard. You stop and you look. And I was on the little 10-speed. I wasn't making, a breeze or anything. I was just kind of going slow, picking through the rocks, so I didn't want to crash. But what happened within the next minute changed my belief system. I always thought, these Bigfoot things were all hoax and, entertaining, to say the least. But at 15 years old, I, felt I had a pretty good concrete grasp of life and what that entailed. But in that minute, when I stopped and looked, and not seeing a moose or a deer, it sounded heavy enough to be a moose. And so, it gave me pause, because the wind wasn't really blowing to where branches would be falling off the pine trees at our neighbor's property. So as I look, I don't want to belay the minute, but I felt like that eerie feeling when, like you said, at Skinwalker Ranch, like in that moment, you don't belong there. And as I look back in the trees with the light breeze that was blowing, I seen something that was out of place. And that was this big trunk that was just kind of swaying with the trees. I was like, wait a minute, what is that? And I just held really still and looked, and this big creature just took one step and then squared up. And that's when my world changed. And I took down that hill because I thought for a second, this thing's trying to deceive me and make me see that there's nothing there, and yet there it is. And I take off down the hill. Both tires on that 10-speed popped. I toggled the wheel, and what that means is you tweak your wheel to where it will not turn. I threw that thing off to the side, and I was down the trail as fast as I could go. And at 15 years old, and you like to play football, you learn to move pretty good. And so the Champagne's cabin, Ernie Champagne, he was probably quarter mile, that seems about right, from where our site was. I didn't let up. When I busted into the cabin, my little sister goes, "Jay, what's wrong?" And I guess I looked white as a ghost. The blood flushed. I'm sure all my preservation of life and limb was concentrated in my core, because I was going on adrenaline. And my dad even, is like, "Jay, you gonna be okay? What's going on?" I said, "I just seen Bigfoot." And they're like, "Oh, yeah, whatever." I said, "No, I did. I was up there by the Browns cabin." The only reason that I felt validated in that sighting was that not more than a week or two, if I recollect correctly, further up the drainage, going up toward the crest of the highway there, somebody else had a sighting. And come to find out, more recently, within the past 3 to 4 years, in that same time frame, this trout farm owner in Ogden had seen it too. I don't recall where his sighting was, or if it was wreaking havoc with his trout farm. I don't remember. But what I'm saying is that 3 sightings within that same envelope of time got me thinking that, you know, yeah, somebody else is picking up on what I'm putting down, you know. So that's my little 2 cents.
Yeah, I've known Utana and her husband for, I don't even know how many years now, quite a while. 2 of the nicest people you ever meet. I've known Utana for a year or 2, and I thought she was probably a year out of high school, and somebody told me she had 10 children, and I said, you liar. Then I found out she did, and she's a little bit older than I thought she was. I don't know her titles, but she sits on the board, I know, of Ancient America magazine. What's your title there?
I don't have a title. I just work with them.
She doesn't have a title. She just worked for him. Anyway, that's pretty prestigious. If you ever look at that magazine, and probably most of you have seen the editor and owner of the magazine he's on TV all the time, and he comes to Utah once a year, puts on a dog and pony show with Ancient America artifacts and different things. Wayne May, but you can see him on TV quite frequently in that, and he puts on quite a show when he comes to Utah and gives lectures and those kind of things. But I know Utana's had the opportunity of going back into different areas back east and doing digs with him and so forth. She and Shim go out on things all the time, and she's one of the most knowledgeable people I know of on Indian and even more ancient things in the state of Utah. If you want somebody that knows more and seen more, you're going to have a hard time finding somebody that's more knowledgeable than Utah is. I was pretty impressed here a couple of years ago when I found out and watched on TV that one of her daughters, who's deaf, holds world championship in martial arts, you know, on KSL and those kinds of things, doing demonstrations and that. But they've got a pretty impressive family and a pretty impressive background, and I've told quite a few people that this is going to be a world-class presentation, which I think it is. I think anybody who had the opportunity to miss this will regret it the rest of their life. This should be something really spectacular. So that being said, Utana, that puts you on the spot there that we've been looking forward to hearing you for some time.
Well, thank you, Kent. Before I get started, I actually just want to say thank you to Kent Smith and Mark Robinson for putting all this together, making this happen. I know it's a lot of work, and I think we should give them a round of applause. And all those that help them, too.